Stillwater's Morning Scramble. And the mayor's in. Well, Joyce, good to see you.
Good morning, Steve.
How'd your weekend go?
It was pretty quiet.
Yeah.
Didn't do a lot this
That's a
weekend.
good weekend, isn't it?
Yes, it was nice. It was certainly better than last weekend, which I spent the vast majority of my waking hours cleaning up tree branches around my yard and other people's. But this weekend was a little quieter. Did a little work, but kind of sat around and watched a soccer game and
you watched a little Cowboy football,
watched a little Cowboy football.
Because I saw in your post you wanted to talk about the defense.
I figured it might come up.
Hey, why not? I mean, the polls
it's
are
impressive.
The polls are. I think we're at 14th, something like that, in the country right now.
Which seems about right.
Yeah, it does. It seems fair to me. And of course, as you mentioned before, we do have a bye week this week and then Bedlam, and need to take care of Bedlam.
And that, I mean,
no pressure there, huh?
Yeah, no. I hate to say it, but that's really the only game that matters right now. I mean, they've played really well up to this point, and I mean the defense in this weekend was just so impressive. Given that, we've seen some times where if the offense can't score, you're just sort of out of luck when the defense is out there that long, and they're having to stop drive after drive, and man, they really were impressive, and they have been all year.
It's easy to we all have biases. But in listening to the Zoom stuff, you almost get to know them better, I think, because they have the one-on-one.
Oh, yeah.
And I mentioned we have biases. The Cowboys are a team easy to like. I mean, I like these guys when they're talking. I mean, they seem very grounded, humble, and maybe you've seen with orange glasses, whatever. But the more you see the interviews and the one-on-ones, it's like, this is I would think even outsiders, if you're trying to pick a team, we could be that team because this looks like a really good group.
Have you been watching the ESPN Plus series?
I have not.
I haven't.
Does that show through on that?
Yeah, it really does. I think the same thing. I mean, you see these guys behind the scenes and dealing with all the COVID stuff and the fact that basically they go to practice, they go to class, then they go sit in their room. Right? They're not getting out much. They're not they're not having what you would consider a normal semester. But they're really committed to it. They're really, down to earth about it. They understand why, and it's a group of folks that
it seems like
can relate to, and they seem like they're good kids. They're just out there, working hard and doing the best they can.
Yeah, and when you get the right leadership, it makes all the difference in the world.
It really does, and I think they've done a good job from the football program, up through the whole athletic program at the university, which is it's been a terrible year in terms of having to deal with revenue problems, and they've had to lay some folks off, and they've had to deal with all of that side of it, but then also try to give these students as much of an experience as they can and be able to play football and soccer and cross country. They've been this semester, and then getting ready for basketball and the spring sports. It's been a really difficult year for them, as well as everybody else is in the community, but I think they've done a really good job of being careful and cautious and taking the precautions they need to take, but also trying to figure out a way to say, okay, this isn't, we're not just going to go into a shell and not do anything.
Right.
So, how do we find a middle ground? And I feel like they've done a pretty good job. I mean, their testing numbers have been great over the last few weeks. I haven't seen them really recently, but I know they've had no positive cases in the athletic department.
I think they're still really It's funny the way because we'll get to our numbers coming up because they are spiking. But Kyle Ray came in the other day on Friday, and he was getting ready to go to Manhattan, and he came in and he was about 45 minutes early, and when he came in, he had his mask on and he kept his distance. He was in the other room, and it's odd the way our brains are conditioned now. And he goes, "I just got tested," and I thought, oh. And the reason he told me that was because he was running early because his testing time was early.
Okay.
So he was just going to hang out a while. Yeah. But your first thought was, he looks like he's going to tell me some bad news. And he didn't, because as far as I know, everybody was A-okay and they went on their way.
And they test 3 times a week for the whole they have the traveling party, which I think Kyle's a part of.
Probably, he is.
He's on the sidelines during those games.
Yeah,
I saw him down there in Manhattan on the sideline. But he so they test. All those folks have to be tested regularly. They have to test, I think, on the Friday right before the game. And honestly, it's a really good, I think, example of what how you can do, how we generally need to be handling this, right? Which is figure out who has it, keep them away from everybody else, and then take the precautions you need to take when you're out there doing what you're doing. So they're playing football games, they're having practice, they're operating 95% of normal, 90% of normal at least, but they're also doing testing a lot, and they're making sure that if anybody comes up, they're getting them away from everybody else, and it's working.
Yeah.
Right. And you said, from a community standpoint, and now, we don't necessarily have the resources to give everybody 3 tests a week from a public perspective, but testing and getting tested and making sure we know, hey, if you have it, figure out you have it and get away from other people so you don't give it to anybody else. And that's the way you stop it from spreading.
And that's one thing we're learning, and we knew that from the start, sort of. But I think most people, and I've seen, I saw a doctor on, and I recognized him, but I don't know what his name was. But he was probably, my guess is 65 years old, and I really appreciated him because he let you know he had the same thought process. And I guess he was an epidemiologist, but he was talking about the dangers of the holidays coming up. And he said, my family is going through the exact same thing. He goes, I have aging parents. And so we're trying to figure out, how can we get together and spend our time? And it was just nice to know that they're thinking the process too. And so, I haven't seen mine all year, right? So, and that's hard.
It is.
When you have aging parents that you want to see. But my plan, we're trying to lay this out, is to, and we're not having a Thanksgiving. We'll get together and communicate all the time. We talk more than we ever did, probably. And that's strange. Because I talked to my mom yesterday. My day to call is Sunday.
Yeah.
And then if there's another time in there where something comes up, it doesn't mean just Sunday, but we all have a time.
Yeah.
Because you make sure somebody.
Yeah.
But there's 6 kids in the family, and I said, we communicate almost every day via text or whatever.
Which probably wasn't happening before all of this.
You're right.
Yeah.
You're right. It would if something came up or whatever, but now, and then it gets to be more of a habit, and whether it's yesterday, my sister sent me something on Alex Trebek right away, and she goes, oh,
Yeah.
And so now there's a dialogue.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, it makes you appreciate it. But here, and I've talked to Jordan, our boss here, about days off, and the plan now is I'll probably be tested and then take a little reprieve from work. And then when I get my negative back, then go home.
Yeah.
And still stay away from everybody.
Yeah.
But be tested beforehand, allow myself the amount of time and sort of self-quarantine for a little bit, because it's important to, and if that works, it works. And if it doesn't, then you change. So.
Yeah. And you've taken the precautions you need to take, and you've done what you can do to try to keep it from you being part of the problem, right? Of being part of the spread. And that's, I think one of the things we've started to figure out better overall as a society at this time in our history, which is, there's still stuff that we can do. There's still plenty of, most of what we want to do, we can still do. There's just a few fairly minor things that we need to do, take as precautions. And if we do that, it's possible to, keep people safe and not be in a situation where we're making other people sick. And I think you're right. There's some silver linings from this year that we've dealt with. I think there is. My family too. We communicate more than we probably did before all of this was going on. Even though we've probably seen each other in person less.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's a little different. It's not, and there's parts of that you wish were not the way they are, for sure. But, I was sitting outside on the patio with my wife last night and just talking about actually Saturday night, how beautiful the weather was, and kind of going, just this whole year, it seems like we've had some really great weather. Back in the spring, it was beautiful. As we sat outside, wasn't anything else going on. We sat outside just a lot more than we have any other year. And we were trying to decide, have we actually had nicer weather for sitting outside on the patio this year, or have we just taken the time to go outside and enjoy it more than we normally would if there was all this other stuff going on? And I think it's probably a combination a little bit, but I think a lot of it is the fact that, we just haven't taken the time to just sit out here and spend time with our family and relax a little bit.
Well, and I think we're all counting our blessings a little differently, because especially with people, because you miss people, and you know that, okay, there's no guarantee in anything, but just in the little things. The other day, and this is how many zillion pictures are taken every day of a sunrise.
Yeah.
I mean, zillions of them. But I drove in the other day, and I get to the top of my hill, and it's right by Boomer, and I mean, it was gorgeous. And so I'm driving to work, and I said, "The heck with that!" And I actually turned around, went back, and drove in, and because it was gorgeous right
Yeah,
there by the deck, and there was a guy in a pickup truck that pulled in a little bit behind, did the exact same
just to
thing.
take a picture
And it's sort of, well, or just
or
to
just to
soak it
stare.
in. I
Yeah,
don't
just to
know,
look.
but yeah, because you are counting the little, and you're
Sure.
going, okay, we got a beautiful community here,
Yeah.
and peaceful. There were some people out, not very many, but 4 or 6 that I saw that were
Yeah.
out enjoying a walk at
Mhm.
6:15 in the morning, and so, but it was just gorgeous, and you
Yeah.
realize maybe we're soaking those things in a different way.
I think that's I think at the very least it's something we can all think about and say, hey, this doesn't all have to be
Yeah,
negative. It doesn't all have to be stressful and worrying. We can look at this and say, hey, look at the positives. Look at the benefits we're seeing from some of this. So it's it's a question of mindset, and I think that's changed for a lot of us. I mean, we've been dealing with this now for 8 months. How to handle what to do in COVID and all that kind of thing. And I think all of us have gone through probably many swings of
yeah.
how we feel about it and what we want to how we want to approach it. And I hope that there are more folks who are kind of seeing it and saying, well, here's the benefits that we've actually seen, even though there are things we've lost.
Yeah. I mentioned I called home. My day is Sunday,
Hmm.
and my mom, who is she's like me. She pays attention to the news and does all that stuff. But she said the local and their big affiliate in Springfield, it's not really like ours, where they're kind of divided up. Lots of people
Hmm.
watch 4 and 9 or 5, and so
Sure.
they're ready. They have a channel, and it's the NBC affiliate that gets like a 60 share. I mean, it's a
Oh yeah.
huge share.
In Springfield.
Yeah, it's Channel 3,
Yeah.
and everybody watches it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of funny because it's not necessarily always better. It's just everybody watches it. When James Dickey was in here, and James grew up in the Ozarks a little bit, Coach Dickey, and we watched the exact same thing, so we knew the same people. But she told me that the main anchor there and a young lady who happened to, her name was Sarah. I forget her last name, but she went to Oklahoma State, and the reason I know that is because she had a seat by me at a ball game at Gallagher Iba, and she worked at a TV station in Wichita Falls at the time.
Okay.
And I knew the guy because he used to work for me, who was the news director there, I guess. But her goal was to end up. She'd interned in Springfield because I told her, I'm from there. I went to
Yeah.
college there, and so she ended up not only going there as a reporter, but marrying the anchor, so
Uh-huh.
the big news anchor. And the Springfield's a market of 250,000 people or something, but that's still a good job. If you're the top anchor,
Yeah.
it's a 6-figure income job. And but she said the news anchor and his wife Sarah, who she said who which I don't really, but they both resigned to go work for. There's a group there called Convoy of Hope, which is a place like how a lot of times you have different groups that go and they just go to different locations. If there's a hurricane or
Oh
something,
yeah.
whatever,
Uh-huh.
they're the
Disaster
ones
relief.
that
Yeah.
fill those things up, and then they go there. And it was really touching because she said they just made an announcement together, and they thought during this they had a calling.
Yeah.
And I think it's a Christian organization, I believe. But anyway, that stuff like that, and
Yeah.
it really affected. She goes, you could just tell, what a nice gesture, because his salary was probably going to be a fraction of what it was.
Sure.
But he felt this was a calling, and going and seeing all these people and covering all these things, he needed to do a different thing. And so
That's
maybe
great.
there are some things that come out to where
Absolutely.
our eyes are opened. And
I think so. I think there are, and I think there's probably a lot more stories like that. And I know we've just from our community seen all of the great stuff from the beginning when we just asked people to help make masks, and all the way through the donations we've seen from businesses and people who have put in their time and people who are donating blood. You guys were talking about blood drives earlier,
yeah.
which is really really important. If you have a chance to go donate blood at one of the local blood drives, please do so. You'll get your antibody test at the same time, and then if it's determined that you've had COVID, you can also donate what they call convalescent plasma, which is the part of your blood
Yeah.
that may have antibodies in it that will help other people recover, which is a really been I think a pretty effective treatment for some folks. So if you've had COVID, or if you think you might have, go donate blood. They'll tell you, and then you can potentially donate convalescent plasma as well.
Yeah, and what I was told by, I think Dr. Jenkins said, you can donate that every 7 days, I believe.
Oh, really? The
Yeah,
plasma? Yeah, I think
yeah,
that
and
makes
so
sense.
you don't have as long a wait, and so if that's a path that you're
Yeah.
able to take, it's really needed right now.
I've given blood a couple times here during the pandemic, and had the antibody test twice as part of that, and negative both times, which
Yeah,
is a good thing, I suppose. But also sometimes you're like, well, if I had it and it wasn't bad, and I could donate
I
convalescent plasma,
know.
that I mean, that seems like a really,
Yeah.
a truly helpful thing that really wouldn't be too hard on most people.
And plus, you'd say, "Well, I've had it already,"
Yeah.
and we don't know all the other effects because it could have long-term effects, and we just don't know.
Yeah, and there's certainly people who are getting it twice,
Right.
that we've seen, and right now, I mean, we can get into this now or later, but I mean, right now we're seeing a substantial increase in cases statewide and locally. It's tough to sort of pin it down. Halloween weekend maybe, and some other things, or may just be people being more lax about the precautions they've been taking, because we had been seeing locally some declining numbers. Since really the beginning of September, our numbers have been dropping pretty steadily, but they've jumped back up. And then the state this weekend on Saturday originally announced 4,700 new cases, and then
Yeah.
revised that down to 4,500 new cases on Sunday. But then they didn't release numbers at all for Sunday.
Yeah.
And so, they said they wanted to make sure the numbers were right, but they also said that 4,500 was a real number, and that was more than twice as many new cases that we'd seen in any other day all year long. So
Well, we had I saw the national list of the top or the most per day um, by date,
mhm.
and they're within the last 10 days. There were 7 of the top ones, or
Yeah,
something like that. And
no,
so it's all over the country right now.
it is, and it's frustrating, because I think it's one of those things where you go, man, we've been trying so hard, and we've been doing a good job, and we've seen, some improvement, and then all of a sudden that changes, and I think that just highlights how little of a grasp we really have on this
Yeah.
thing. I mean, we're taking the precautions we can take, and we're working really hard to do that, but not everybody is, and it's also it's a really contagious disease, and when people are not, taking the precautions they need to take, it can get out of hand really, really quickly.
And we've all heard people, and I mean, I feel this too, but I'm not done with it. I'm still following the same things the best I can that I did before. But I've had several say, I'm just tired of it. Well,
Yeah.
that doesn't mean it's going to go away just because it's not tired of you yet.
Yeah, and that's the unfortunate part about it. And I think it's understanding for all of us, right? I mean, at some point you just want to go, all right, that's enough.
Yeah.
We're done. And you'd like to be able to do that, but you can't. And I think the really concerning thing to be considering is the fact that we are seeing, for a long time there was this sense of, well, only very vulnerable populations are going to get truly sick, right? You're only seeing serious illness in people over the age of 65, or people with serious existing conditions. But that is, I think, starting to change a little bit.
Yeah.
We're seeing, just from our hospitalization numbers in Stillwater, the ICU numbers of people below the age of 65 has been higher than it was previously. We've seen very serious illness in younger, healthy folks. And I don't know if I don't know the science, whether that's a change in the way that disease is working, or if it's just a matter of the spread is, more people in those younger, healthier age groups are getting it, and therefore we're seeing more actual instances of it being serious in them. There's been a lot of talk on social media. A local firefighter here in Stillwater who is young and healthy and would have no reason to be seen as someone who would be vulnerable, especially vulnerable to this disease, who continues to be in very, very poor health in the hospital with COVID, and I think those are issues where we have to look and say, none of us can stand up and say, oh, I don't need to worry about this.
Right.
It's not going to affect me, so I'm not going to, it requires our continued vigilance.
We had and we'll get a break in here just a little bit. And if you have a question or comment, 533-1020. But Jesse Martin was in with me on Thursday and talking about the configuration of Gallagher-Iba.
Yeah.
And it's only going to be about 3,300. But the fact, and I really appreciate the the effort with the distancing, because it's different than Boone Pickens because you're
It's
inside.
inside, yeah.
And when they start, and so I appreciate the fact that, okay, that is a consideration because you are talking about turning away some money. I mean, that's a revenue, it will take a hit.
Yeah, I spoke with Jesse about it last week sometime too, and we were sort of joking that there had been some years back where getting 3,300 people in Gallagher was a good day, but now, I mean, with the great
Yeah.
team that Coach Boynton's put together and the excitement, yeah, I mean, you kind of, it is one of those disappointing things where you go, man, we could have really started to see Gallagher be what it used to be. With these teams, but yeah, I mean, I think they're doing a good job, and he talked about how they're going to actually have the chairs that aren't being used will be like zip tied shut.
Yeah,
So you can't.
they say it looks pretty strange actually,
Yeah.
like some are on risers and stuff, but
Yeah.
they've had experts go over this on what's the safest, and you are inside as opposed to being outside.
And that's I mean, again, going back to the fact that they've said, listen, there are certain things we can do safely, but we're really going to take the precautions. We're going to be serious about taking the precautions, even though it's a financial burden, even though it's not as fun as it would be if we didn't have to do this. They've done a really good job, I think, of prioritizing safety over just the financial or the traditional aspects of what we want it to be.
Yeah, and any of us can get it. I mean, that's why I never point fingers because I could have it tomorrow, but the Big 12 has done better than Big 12 and the SEC, who were the first ones to say it looks like they had protocols and maybe did more homework.
Mm-hmm.
But you look at like Wisconsin 2 weeks in a row. The military academies, basically all of them were off last week. I think Tulsa was supposed to play Navy, and the Navy came down with an outbreak of COVID. It seems like we're doing better than many.
I think, yeah, I was actually speaking with Coach Holder about this earlier last week as well, about the fact that the Big 12 and OSU and some of these other schools have really, they approached it with saying, okay, how are we going to deal with this, right? We can't just close everything down and turn off the lights and say, see you next year or 2 years or however long. We're going to have to figure out how to deal with it. And they've had a much longer experience now of figuring out how to deal with it, right? I mean, they had times early on where the numbers were really bad and, they were having issues and they had to figure out how do we get this under control. And they've actually done that. Whereas some of these other schools that did just sort of say, no, we're not going to deal with it. And then figured out, oh man, we better open back up. They're trying to do all that same amount of learning in a much more compressed time frame. Whereas OSU had a lot longer before they had to start playing games to figure out how do we keep this in control. And so I think there's some real truth to that, and this real idea that
we know what we're doing.
We've got to, and you only know that because through experience, through doing it, right? Through figuring out, okay, what can we do to keep each other safe? What can we do to keep this thing open? And continue to go forward. And again, I think the lessons that we can learn from a larger perspective from watching how OSU athletics or OSU in general has handled it, they test a lot. Everybody wears a mask.
Yeah.
Everybody is very serious about it. I mean, the athletes, the players, the students, they understand that if they don't follow the protocols, if they don't do what they're supposed to do, they're jeopardizing not just their ability to play a game on Saturday, but potentially also 25 of their teammates who they may have been in contact with, and so they understand the consequences a little better of not being as careful and not following the precautions. And so, I think the rest of us can look at that and say, listen, they're still playing the game they love to play. They're doing it with certain precautions in place, and they're being very careful about those precautions, and it's working. And that applies to the rest of us too. We can still do the things we love to do. We just have to do it with precautions in place. We have to go get tested. If there's any reason to believe we might have been in contact with someone, or if we've been in a situation where there was a lot of personal contact, go get tested. Just make sure. Figure it out so you're not out there unknowingly spreading this around to somebody else. And then, wear your mask. Keep your distance from people. Do not put yourselves in situations where, there's a high risk of spreading a respiratory illness. I mean, it's a fairly clear set of things we've been talking about now for months. And, the more we do it and the better we're able to comply with those recommendations, I think the more success we'll have.
Yeah, I was kind of disappointed in myself on what I brought in today because now we're to the point where you want to wear a cool mask, and I got a cooler batch in, and the one I have in here is the
The plain
blue.
old blue
Yeah,
surgical
and
mask.
it's like, okay, that's boring now, but it is.
Man, it's crazy what's out there now. It's a whole industry of,
Oh
I mean,
yeah.
it's
Well, I've just
capitalism
got
at
the
work,
standard
right?
black ones, but it was a gift from someone, and so I really like them, and so I thought, oh, I'll wear my new mask today,
Yeah.
and then I forgot it.
It's funny because you see pictures or whatever on social media, people wearing masks, and you're like, oh man, where did you
Right.
get that cool one? Actually saw Mayor Holt from Oklahoma City had a picture up of him getting a flu shot, which is also a very important thing to do. I got mine a couple weeks ago as well, but if you haven't had a flu shot yet, please go get a flu shot. But he had a mask on that was the old state flag, the old
Oh, okay.
Oklahoma state flag, the old red. It was a red flag that had a star and just the number 46, which is the number of state we were admitted to the union, which I really liked, that old original Oklahoma state flag. And he had a
Wow,
mask that
that's
had
cool.
that logo on it. And I was like, oh man, where did he get that? Like, I didn't figure out where to get one of those.
Mask envy, a new saying from 2020. So, hey, good stuff. We'll take a break here, and we'll roll on.